I am out in a public space, so I'm going to remain with my mask on for this meeting. But I wanted to welcome all of you who are here for the 2021 Voter Access Advisory Committee meeting. And before I have some bullet points to go down later. But before we do that, I want to turn the time over to Paul Andrews, our Kitsap County Auditor, who will have some opening remarks.
Oh, thank you, Steve. I first, I just want to start by thanking every one of the committee members that takes the time out to be part of this and help us create a better environment for conducting our elections and meeting the needs of the different groups in the county. And so, we can't understand everything that the different members of the community deal with, and so it's nice to get input from experts that have real life scenarios and situations that help us understand that and make this a better process for everybody. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Steve. Again, thank you all for being part of this. We always look forward to this. I apologize for the short notice on this one, but we've already provided notice for the next meeting that is going to be scheduled in the week of the 23rd of May. We don't have a specific date yet, but so you can start pre-planning on your schedule as we look forward to 2022's election cycle. But now back to Steve, and we will get on with the program.
Thank you, Paul. I just what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a presentation about 2020 and 2021, and we'll talk some about the plan. I've received suggested edits, including an idea from Sean that we use auto caption while we're doing things like when we're doing the video for the LNA test to do auto captions. We can also have it captioned afterwards so that the captioning is actually accurate. We take that video and we post it on YouTube. And I think it's a strong idea, honestly. Obviously, I think for obvious reasons. I'm going to try to share my screen, and this is where things may get a little challenging. And I knew how to do that. I've done this on Zoom, but I haven't done it on Teams before. So I'm looking for the screen that I have that has that. Okay, so you might have to tell me what you're seeing, because when I click on this screen, are you seeing the slide presentation? Do you see just the 2021 Access Advisory Committee meeting slide?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. That's all I want you to see at this point. Now I have to do some adjustments so that I can see the PowerPoint controls. There we go. Okay, so for this meeting, obviously I don't need to say this. It's said every time anybody goes over the past year. 2020 knocked us off our game. Well, I shouldn't say it knocked us off our elections game, but it did help alter some plans. I looked for a graphic that illustrated the 2 years, and this was found in Israel. I think as we were going into the new year, they created this graphic that kind of illustrates what we've been focused on for the last couple of years. I want to say I kind of want to review some of this and how it affected things in elections. On February 25th, the CDC said that the COVID-19 was heading towards a pandemic. Without going back over notes from that time, this seems about right. This seems about the time that the conversation started to begin about what are we headed for. And despite that, we had a presidential primary on March 10th. We had it scheduled. We had people working here. We had people working, close together, and we had voters coming into our vote centers. We had been having the conversation about what COVID was going to do. I had a local event here, and I had brought it up, and I think it was the week before that election day, and I got up on stage and said I thought about canceling this event, and there were grumbles in the audience about the fact that I would consider that. And so we were just in a different place back then. We had the presidential primary, things went well. 3 days later, the president declared a national emergency. So things got intense pretty quick. And I think for a lot of us, it made us think, okay, how are we going to address this in elections? One of the other changes was the governor issued the stay-at-home order later that month. It got extended in May, and this was at the same time um, that candidates were getting ready to file for office. And on May 5th, he did something that was significant personally to me, and I'll explain why. But he waived the signature requirement for candidates. Everybody who's present and live in this knows that a candidate can file to run for office, and if they don't want to pay the filing fee, they can gather enough signatures to make up for it. They can get one signature for every dollar that they're required to pay, and that will be essentially their filing fee, assuming all the signatures match. Well, the governor waived the signature requirement because obviously people couldn't be out interacting. And so we had a candidate filing on May 11th to 15th. That wasn't a huge deal here because most candidates for that election were filing in Olympia. We did have a few in legislative races that could file here, but we just handled it by having them go to our election store. We had staff here ready to assist anybody who filed in person. And again, there weren't that many. Um, what the governor's signature requirement did is that it helped create about 37 candidates for governor, several for lieutenant governor, and on down the list. Locally, it didn't really seem to have that big an impact. I think I recall one local race in which somebody used the signature waiver to actually file to run. But it had its biggest impact on the state. And personally, it meant that the local voters pamphlet was going to be quite a bit bigger, and it added some time. On August 4th, we had our primary, and by then we had worked through quite a bit that was going on nationally and locally as far as social distancing and that. The processing room was upgraded to add safety features, and there were distancing requirements, and we had some staff who opted to not work in processing out of safety concerns either for themselves or for people in their home. And the same went for the November 3rd general election. We couldn't have everybody processing ballots back in the processing room, and so some of our work went on into the lobby of the auditor's office. A lot of social distancing going on, and people were generally safe. And the great news is that we got through the primary and the general election, and to our knowledge, there were no known outbreaks from the work we were doing here. And we think that has a lot to do with the measures that we took and the safety measures that we took, and the staff members, the extra help that we have. They were conscious to do things on that level. Now, getting to the issue, this is an important thing to discuss because of the impact that it had on elections nationally. And as you're all aware, the elections nationally, there were a lot more jurisdictions doing vote at home, vote by mail, the way we've been doing it in Washington for more than a decade across the state. Um, and so it proved to be a bit of a test. Now there are conversations about vote by mail that go on, but I will say that for um, the the community of people with disabilities, it had an obvious impact. And from what we can tell, most of it was positive. For example, nearly 62% of people with disabilities voted in 2020, and that was up from 56% 4 years earlier. There are other factors that influence voter turnout, but that was the biggest jump in voters with disabilities voting than they had seen before. Um, there was a higher turnout reported across all disability types and demographic groups. That's kind of important. So there wasn't just one single group. Um, and the turnout gap, and this is important to note, that there is still a turnout gap between people with and without disabilities that apparently didn't change. If I recall correctly, and I didn't look this up beforehand, but if I call correctly, it's in the neighborhood of somewhere of 3 to 6%, and that gap remained. However, um, this is a national number. More than 53% of people with disabilities voted by mail compared to 42% overall, or people without disabilities. So people with disabilities took advantage of this opportunity. Um, and this number, I'd like to dive more into that because on one level it seems a little bit low, but 26% of people with disabilities and more people who were not disabled went to polling places than people with disabilities. So it sounds like that, to me, this is a reflection of what vote by mail, the advantage it has for voters with disabilities. And this is interesting, and this is telling. The 23 states that made it easier to vote by mail appeared to have a higher increase in the rate of disability turnout. They say that the difference is within the margin of error, but what I think this suggests is that in Washington, we're not going to see that there was a huge increase in voter turnout among voters with disabilities because we've been well set up from the get-go to serve them. This was interesting to me. It's an 8-year span, but 11% of people with disabilities had trouble voting in 2020. Any is too many, but it's down from 26% 8 years earlier. I don't know what the numbers were in 2016. 5% of people with disabilities experience difficulties voting by mail compared to 18% who did it at a polling place. So again, I think that suggests that here in Washington, we were not only because we've had a long history of voting at home and voting by mail, we were well set up to address the pandemic. We were also well set up to address voters with disabilities. Voters with disabilities are well positioned here in this state to make their voice heard. The questions that I think that we can continue to answer, and when we meet again in the week of May 23rd, some of the questions that I would like to get answered by then. Does online ballot access significantly improve the voting experience for voters with disabilities? As you may be aware, if you access your ballot online, you can mark and I want to be careful how I say this because people get this confused with online voting. It's not online voting. It's just an opportunity to print a ballot at home. And you have the opportunity to mark it on your computer screen and have that be your printout. Once you print it out, you print out also the declaration and you return that and the ballot back to our office, either through a Dropbox or by mail. But we want to find out if online ballot access would make a difference for people with disabilities. I also want to get answered, and I have been in contact with. It took me a few days, but I found out who is leading the Peninsula Council for the Blind here locally, and we're beginning to have conversations. And what I want to find out from the group is whether an audible version of the local voters pamphlets would create significant value. In Clark County, they're doing this, and other counties are doing this, and the state does this. But we're also aware that folks with visual disabilities often have screen readers, and if doing an audible version of the ballot would create value, I think it's something we can explore. And finally, the big question is what more we can do. And I think that's going to happen through lots of questions that perhaps we could have had this last year, but it was it was a challenging year for everyone. So with that, I just want to, are there any questions about anything that was said in that part of this meeting so far? And are we all seeing each other again? Okay, good. That worked then. Good thing I practiced this before we did it. you've all seen a copy. You've all had a copy of the plan. We've gone over some accomplishments. I think the big one, and I'm putting Daryl on the spot, but I wanted to mention one of the biggest things we did for this. One of the biggest accomplishments we had this year was opening the Vote Center in Bremerton. And Daryl, you were involved in a lot of the conversations for getting that Vote Center established. Do you have any thoughts on the impact that that has had, and how that makes things, how that affects things looking forward? I think you're still muted.
I actually have to, sorry, I actually have to unmute in two spots on my computer. I think I think it has the potential for positive for accessibility, but probably more around people that aren't able to drive. I know that the mobile units for printing ballots aren't really used anymore at the vote centers than they have been in the past at any of them, let alone the Marvin Williams Center. I think the big advantage to Marvin Williams Center is that is actually for accessibility for people that live in Bremerton and don't drive. There was one of the options was the Norm Dix Government Center and for a place, and the Marvin Williams Center was much better, much more accessible than Norm Dix. Norm Dix is handicap accessible if you drive up to it.
One of the other oh no, I'm hearing myself twice. Um, maybe Daryl, you need to mute again. Thank you. One of the other one of the issues we discussed last time was removing the mobile vote centers. What we did in the primary, we had agreed in 2020, early 2020. We met in mid-February that time, that we would remove them for the primary and then reassess and see how things looked there, whether the mobile vote centers worked. And obviously, between that meeting in mid-February and even by April or May, we kind of knew we weren't going to be welcome there anyway. That they were limiting the number of people who showed up in person for the mobile vote centers, and I think I guess this is one of the questions we're going to have going forward is how, if there is a need there that can be served, how we can do that. And so I think going forward, we will look for ideas, and that'll be another question that we'll answer going forward. I don't think there was any impact. People were not utilizing the vote centers, the mobile vote centers that frequently, but there may be a way to address that in ways. And this may be something to discuss with Kitsap Regional Library and with Olympic College if ideas are hatched for that, are germinated for that. Again, I mentioned online ballot access. This is something that we will want to have conversations about. And again, you have the plan before you. I have received, like as I mentioned, I received recommendations for edits from Sean and from John Allen and for some others, and we'll make those. And I hope you can take a look at the plan and suggest your feedback. For this point forward, I just want to open the discussion. If anybody has something they want to discuss on, and I want to acknowledge that this meeting coming as late in the year is not as ideal as it could be, but I think most people, in the feedback I've received, most people are well aware of everything that we've been going, not just us, but the whole world has been going through in 2020 and 2021 and how that might affect things. And it has. And a lot of the reasons that this meeting happened as late as it did was because I think personally I was kind of waiting to see where, I guess for lack of a better phrase, where we return to normal. And the answer is we're not going to probably for quite some time. And so now it's time to get back to addressing this is, I hate using, people hate hearing this, but this is kind of the new normal now. And so I think it's imperative to proceed and continue to address these issues with high intensity. And that's going to involve having conversations with folks throughout all of those communities. Now, I just want to kind of open up the floor now, though, and see if there are any questions that you have for anyone else, and see if there's anything that you think we need to address in in greater detail as we go forward. If you don't have anything to say, this could be a very short meeting, and that's not always a bad thing. But if you have some suggestions, I'll be taking notes for them. And also, we have Amy Epperly, who's taking minutes of the meeting. We'll be posting those later. So I'm just going to throw the floor open to anyone if you have any questions or anything that you think that we should be addressing.
Well, hey, this is Sean. Am I the only non-Kitsap County participant today?
You are.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad I'm here, and I just wanted to say hi to Regina. And I guess, of course, I want to share some, ideas or thoughts. But I did. It's funny. I think I emailed back to you the agenda that you sent, and not the plan with my markup. And I did see when you were doing the live stream on the logic. And I took a quick peek, but again, that idea that like if you use Teams, I don't know what you're using when you live stream or if you're going straight to YouTube, but like anytime you film on a phone, lighting, audio, all those things leave a lot to be desired. And so like, again, the cameras that are just rolling during ballot counting, it's probably less important. But if there's a dialogue and a discussion that's happening and people can't hear it or make it out, then that doesn't really help in terms of transparency. So, if you have a good audio setup with a microphone, and if you're using Zoom, or if you're using Facebook, just look like when we use Zoom, like Teams has nice auto captioning. For Zoom, I believe we had to purchase like a third-party tool, and they're pretty accurate. I mean, they kind of correct as they go. But that's a nice accessibility enhancement when you're already kind of going out of your way to be transparent. I'll just give you an example. Like during the opening week of the quarter, we only have a small handful of in-person classes, and so meet the president and the president of student government. They're in our big theater. They're filming it on Facebook. Nobody can hear anything. It's wasn't really worth the effort. So, anyways, that's just a small suggestion. I mean, I'm already a huge fan of I don't know if you still call it the online voter guide, but you can't get much better than that. And it seems like that meets the needs of a lot of people. And when you look at the historical data on AVU Act use, when you go to the different accessible voting locations, the overall usage is so low. To me, it suggests a couple things that, other methods are working better for people. The online voter guide, and you do see people depositing their ballots, so that's nice. I know not everybody trusts the mailbox, and it might be an inconvenience for somebody who can't drive to get to a ballot drop location. So it looks like there's value in the ballot deposit, but not as much value in the accessible voting unit, and even issuing those ballots through the online voter guide, which again I'm a huge fan of. So I know you're also committed to access and being out there, and yet people don't take you up on it. So I don't know. It's a tough call. I will say, when the time comes to come back to Olympic College, is it better to set up in the Bremer Student Center, or would you be better served to maybe like go into our Military and Veteran Support Center? I think we talked about this at the last in-person meeting, which seems like a lifetime ago now. But are there ways to get more targeted with who you're trying to reach? There's a lot of disabled veterans. And if you were to set up in our veteran support center, you may actually find an audience that could benefit from some of the accessibility, a more readily available audience than just setting up in the Bremer Student Center and hoping that the people come up to you could benefit from your services. So I don't know. I guess what I'm sort of suggesting is, are there opportunities for more targeted, accessible voting opportunities as opposed to what we're doing at Olympic College? One might be targeting our military and veteran support center. They have their own space. It's a super active community. I've met with, worked with, and talked with voters with from all kinds of different circumstances and backgrounds, voters with disability, PTSD, voters, military, just well-adjusted, and things are going great. It's just different for everybody. But I don't know, maybe the solution is a more targeted approach than canvassing the county. Just an idea.
Is it right there on campus, and is it close to, I mean, and this is just out of my curiosity, and these are maybe your conversations we can have later, but I like that idea. Is the building accessible to everyone on campus if there's an event there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there is.
Okay.
I mean, obviously with the pandemic, it's
Yeah.
different, but it used to be a hub for activity. They would do all kinds of outreach, fellowship, and they always open the doors to everybody. But it's a space where veterans, active duty independents can go to get, they have their own computer lab, coffee, refreshments, getting military funding is its own specialized things, but they open the doors to everybody.
That is an interesting idea to explore. I think one of the issues with the Bremer Center is that it's, not everybody has to go there every day or anything like that. And it's, you're looking at a general audience that may or may not be interested in you. We've had successful voter registration events there before, but this actually might, this is something we're talking about, I think.
Yeah, I think if you're coming to Olympic College, Bremerton campus, getting a little more targeted, trying that next time when the timing's right, rather than just sort of, again, generally canvassing and hoping for the best.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Anybody else have issues they want to discuss? One of the things I want to bring up is that Thurston County has opened up they're calling it, I don't remember if they're calling it some sort of vote center, but they have something in their library that is opening sometime next week, and it operates kind of as a vote center. And I want to look more into what they're doing, and if this addresses the community with the people with disabilities, because I know that our own librarians were, and it's one of those things that you don't want to cede control of something, and so we don't want to turn librarians into elections workers, but they do want to help in some way, and so I'd like to see what's happening in situations like that, and what kind of question. And the first question they get is, what kind of elections questions do people ask when they're in the library? What kind of help are they looking for when they're in there? We know a lot of people go there to use the computers. And if there is some sort of support, I think this came up in a meeting, a training that we had offered by the state down in Lacey a couple of years ago, and it didn't seem like something we would want to rush out and do. But I don't know, to keep our eyes on how we can garner support from the library system, I think is worthwhile. Anybody else have anything to add? All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say until Monday, if you have changes that you'd like to make to the plan, feel free to send them my way. And I want to thank you for taking part in this meeting on such short notice. Obviously, in May, we expect to have more participation, and I'm glad we were able to address this year. But I think this is good. I think this is good information. It's good stuff to remind us of the work that we're required to do. And I also feel good about where we are in Washington, about how things are working. I think, Sean, you make a good point, is that a lot of the needs are being met, and it's worth recognizing that. There's always more we can do, but I think we're in a better position here in Washington than folks in a lot of states are, because things are working, and because people have access that they might not have anywhere in other places. So, any other comments? Seeing none, as I've heard in legislative meetings and that before, I think we can go ahead and close this meeting, and look forward to my emails with updates to the plan and plans for the meeting in May. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
I'm gonna be the last one to leave. Oh, I guess I can make Regina leave.